Before haunted houses, before horror movies, before we learned the history of Halloween, most of us knew the holiday in a much simpler way. We knew what it felt like. We knew the excitement of finally putting on the costume we'd been waiting weeks to wear. We knew what it was like to race home from school because tonight was the night. The pumpkins were already glowing. The candy bucket was waiting by the front door. The neighborhood looked just a little different than it had the day before. Somehow more magical. And maybe the most wonderful part of all was that for one evening, you could become anyone. A pirate, a vampire, a ghost, a superhero, a monster. It didn't matter. Because Halloween has always been about imagination. And today's artifact isn't simply preserving a song. It's preserving that feeling. I am Gregory Hallows, and this is Preserve Halloween Podcast. So welcome to another Archive Spotlight. This is where we not only preserve the artifacts of Halloween, but the stories that keep them alive. And on this episode, we're opening our second archive entry. This one is about Nekromantix and their song Trick or Treat. So one of my favorite things about Halloween is that everyone remembers it a little differently. Ask 10 people about their favorite Halloween memory, and you'll probably hear 10 completely different stories. Some people remember the homemade costumes. Some people remember the plastic masks that never fit our faces right. Some remember haunted hayrides. Some remember classroom parties. Some remember construction paper decorations taped to windows, dumping a pillowcase full of candy across your living room floor to see what treasures the night had brought. And that's the wonderful thing about Halloween. It isn't made from just one tradition. It's made from thousands of memories. And every once in a while, someone manages to write a song that captures those memories perfectly. And not through nostalgia alone, but through recognition. Recognition of a feeling that almost every Halloween lover understands. And today's artifact is one of those songs. Now here's the funny part. If I asked you to imagine the band most likely to write a heartfelt song about the joy of trick-or-treating, would you picture in your head a Danish psychobilly band, fronted by a musician who plays a coffin-shaped upright bass? But that's exactly who this podcast is about. Appearances can be wonderfully deceiving, and Nekromantix built their entire identity around horror. Monsters, graveyards, ghosts, the undead. Everything about the band, from their name to their stage presence, suggested they lived inside the pages of an old horror comic. Their founder even built the band's most recognizable instrument himself, an upright bass shaped like a coffin. But not as a gimmick, as a statement. Before audiences would ever hear a single note, they knew what kind of world they were about to enter. So, a lot of bands become recognizable because of a song, or a logo, or the singer's voice, or what somebody looks like. But Nekromantix became instantly recognizable because of an object. So let's just imagine you walk into a club in the early 90s, the lights are dim, the audience grows quiet, and then someone walks onto the stage carrying not a guitar, not a bass, but a coffin. But only when you look closer do you realize that coffin is the bass. It's unforgettable. The original version of the instrument was built from a child-sized coffin, but they later redesigned it to improve the sound and make touring easier. And that's a very odd detail, but it needs to be in the story, right? And the thing about Nekromantix is they weren't an overnight success. Like many bands, they spent years building their audience, one performance, one fan at a time. They were formed in Copenhagen in 1989 after Kim Neckerman left the Danish Navy, where he spent 8 years serving as a submarine radio operator. So he went from life beneath the sea, like SpongeBob, to standing on a stage in front of people playing horror-inspired rock and roll on a coffin-shaped bass. If there's ever proof that Halloween has a way of finding people who love it, there's a great example. The earliest versions of Nekromantix played only a couple of local shows before they were invited to a psychobilly fest in Hamburg, Germany. And that changed everything. That led to a recording contract, touring, records, and a reputation. But not as a novelty act, as one of Europe's defining psychobilly bands. And what's remarkable is they did all of this while remaining completely true to their identity. They never stopped writing about monsters. They never abandoned their horror imagery. They never packed away the coffin bass, hoping that they would go mainstream. They actually leaned into their whole persona even harder, and audiences loved it. And by the end of the 90s, something interesting happened. Nekromantix built an impressive following across Europe. And in America, they were something more along the lines of a rumor or a recommendation that one of your friends who listens to really cool music from other countries would give you. They were a band that you heard about from someone who knew someone, and you could not find any of their albums in a record store. You had to go to specialty shops, or you had to order an import, or, they felt like a myth. It's like one of those decorations you remember as a kid, but nobody can find it anymore, right? So, what happened? Every artifact has a moment, and this moment is where history quietly opens the door. And for Nekromantix, that door was in the form of another musician, best known as the singer and guitarist for Rancid, Tim Armstrong, was a fan of the band. He heard demos of new material they were putting out. And not only did he compliment them, he signed them to Hellcat Records, and that changed the future of Nekromantix forever. Released in 2002, Return of the Loving Dead became their first album to receive wide distribution in the United States. And suddenly, American audiences who only heard whispers of this strange Danish horror band finally could experience them for themselves. And what makes this fascinating is when you look at history, when you go backwards, things seem inevitable. But if you're looking at the present time and you don't know its history yet, you don't really know what's happening. And when this album came out, nobody knew this would introduce the world other than, where they were playing. I guess by world, I mean the United States. That's very close-minded, but they were introduced to a lot more people with this album. And 20 years later, we're still talking about them as a band because they're amazing. And that's preservation. So imagine you've never heard Nekromantix before, right? And someone hands you one of their albums. And not only is the album cover cool and they look like just a cool band, right? You see titles about murder, the undead, cheerleaders, graveyards, haunted places. Everything about their packaging tells you this is a horror band, right? And then you start listening and you get halfway through the album and you hear Trick or Treat. And then suddenly the monsters and the horror kind of steps aside, because that's not what this song's about. This song is about us. This song is about every person who spent their October as a kid wondering what costume they were going to wear. Every family that was carving pumpkins together. Every neighborhood transformed by glowing jack-o'-lanterns. Every Halloween that seemed to last forever, even though it's over way too quick. One of the things that I researched and found about the band describes this particular song about being all about the costumes. And isn't that what we do still? Like as adults, we remember the costume, like the costume that we had to have, or the one that was the best costume we had as a kid. no matter what it was. Like, I just posted something on Instagram and all over social media of me dressed as the Hulk as a kid. Like, I still remember that costume, and I have photographic proof, which is awesome. But we always remember the fun costume that we did or wish we did. But in that, that costume, I was the Hulk, but some people would look at it and go, what are you supposed to be? And that didn't matter because I knew I was the Hulk, right? And that's one of the things the song captures, not the fear of the holiday, the memories we have. And as we all know, every holiday has its own soundtrack. In Christmas, you hear sleigh bells and, all the things associated with that holiday. 4th of July has marching bands, fireworks, songs about, Americana type stuff. Thanksgiving has football games when you're, in the one room eating and you hear football in the other room. But Halloween, that is a holiday that sounds different for everyone. For some people, it's hearing a haunted house, the creaking door. For some people, it's hearing Vincent Price laugh at the end of Thriller. Maybe for you, it's still Monster Mash. Like, that may be your Halloween. Maybe it's, rustling of corn stalks in the October wind. Or maybe something quieter. Maybe you hear children laughing 3 streets away who are just excited that somebody recognized their costume. Maybe it's just that crinkle of the candy wrapper that opening that you got in your huge pile of candy. Maybe it is that weird way we talked when we're wearing plastic vampire fangs. You can't even pronounce your own name, right? Maybe it's the soft scrape of a pumpkin bucket dragging across a front porch because it is now way too heavy and full of candy to carry. Those are all Halloween sounds too. And a lot of times we forget that part. We forget it's not just the music. We spend a lot of time celebrating the monsters and, the decorations and all this other stuff, but we forget to celebrate the memories we have of Halloween. And that's what makes this song so special. It doesn't ask you to be afraid, it asks you to remember. It's basically a love letter to October. And that's the thing, you look at Nekromantix, you see the logo, you see the album covers, the coffin base, singing about monsters, the graveyards. But with Trick or Treat, you're not celebrating what scares you, you're celebrating what excites you. And that's a very important We'll be right back after this quick break. I am Gregory Hallows, your voice behind the Preserve Halloween podcast and founder of the Halloween Preservation Society. Halloween is more than a holiday. It's history, folklore, and a tradition worth protecting. If you love the stories, the research, and the deep dives into Halloween I bring you, please consider supporting the Preserve Halloween podcast. Your support can help me with more research opportunities, including travel to locations relevant to Halloween history, and to bring you even more insight into the world's greatest holiday. Every one of your contributions, no matter the amount, helps keep the jack-o'-lantern glowing just a little bit longer. So support the show if you can, help me preserve the past, and keep Halloween history alive for generations to come. Check the links in the show description to find out more. And thank you. And now, back to the podcast. As we all know, anticipation is one of Halloween's greatest traditions. Thinking about it's coming, countdowns. We're almost there. I've already seen a bunch of countdowns to Halloween. We're over 100 days away. But think back for you as a kid, right? Halloween did not begin when the sun went down on October 31st. It began many weeks earlier when stores started filling with costumes, when schools announced Halloween parties, when pumpkins started appearing outside the grocery store, when neighborhoods started slowly transforming one house at a time. So by the time Halloween arrived, we had been celebrating for weeks and just anticipating. And just, we could not wait. So let me ask you a question. Do you remember the costume? Now, I'm not talking about any costume. I'm talking about the costume. The one you couldn't stop thinking about. The one you saw in the department store catalog. The one that was hanging on a rack beneath the fluorescent lights. Maybe the costume to you is the one your parents made by hand. Maybe it wasn't perfect and that was the best part about it. Maybe your mask fogged up every time you breathed and you couldn't see. Maybe the elastic in your mask broke halfway through the night and you had to hold it up with your hand the rest of the day. That didn't matter because for that evening, you were not pretending. You were that character. And that's one of the best things that children understand instinctively. Halloween isn't about dressing up like someone. It's about becoming that thing. Even if it's only till you have to go to bed. And that's the feeling that this song preserves. Not the costume, but the imagination. And this song doesn't rush you to that. There's energy, there's attitude, everything that you would expect from a psychobilly band. But underneath all of that, there's a smile. The band is telling you, come on, let's go trick-or-treating. And that's not something that you can manufacture. That's not something you can fake. That comes from people understanding genuinely why Halloween matters. Because it's fun. One of the other articles I read about the band and the song described it as the good times of October rather than the horrors of Halloween night. And that somewhat sounds negative, but the thing is, not every October memory is built around ghosts. Some are built around laughter. Some are built around, things that aren't scary. And there's something that's that's fascinating about songs. They freeze a time. Photographs freeze a single moment. Decorations remind us what Halloween looked like. Old costumes remind us what Halloween felt like. But music preserves the time itself. You can hear a song and you're transported back to the time that you heard that song. It's like a time machine. Suddenly you're on your grandparents' front porch. Your pillowcase is already half full of candy. Somebody's burning leaves somewhere nearby you. The porch light comes on. A door opens. And somebody smiles at you before giving you another handful of candy. That is the power of music. It doesn't simply remind us of the past. It lets us visit the past. And I think that's why Trick or Treat's such a special song, because it's not chasing nostalgia, it's creating nostalgia. And so whenever I do one of these podcasts, I have to ask myself, what is so special about this song? What makes it important enough to want to preserve? There's 1,000 songs about, ghosts and monsters, and there's entire albums devoted to horror. So why has Trick or Treat become a song that Halloween enthusiasts recommend to each other? It's honest. It's an honest song. It talks exactly about what it's, wanting to get across to you. It understands something every Halloween lover eventually discovers. Halloween is not measured how frightened we are. It's measured by how much we look forward to it. And think about, your own history. The best Halloweens don't begin with fear. They begin with anticipation, waiting, imagining, planning, dreaming. And that's what this song celebrates. It's a straight up Halloween jam for sure, right? But it's celebrating something else. It feels like Halloween. And One of the best things about trying to preserve Halloween, like I do, is you have to realize every generation contributes something new to the pot. Our grandparents had their radio dramas. Our parents had their novelty records. Some of us grew up with Monster Mash, others with Ghostbusters, others with Thriller. Some of us discovered Halloween through a variety of music, some through punk, some through heavy metal, hip hop, psychobilly. But none of those experiences are better than any other one. They're just different chapters in the same story. And that's why I wanted to put this song inside the archives. Not because it represents psychobilly, but because it represents their generation Halloween. So every October, we've talked about this before, someone discovers a song for the first time, including this one. And somewhere else, someone hears it and they remember being the age when it came out because they were already, out there. And that's how traditions survive. They don't stand still. They are passed on from one person to the next. And that's the basis of keeping this stuff around. Halloween gives us permission to imagine. Children become superheroes. Adults imagine revisiting their childhood. Collectors imagine the stories behind the artifacts on their shelves. Every one of us imagines Halloween a little differently, but that's what unites us. And that's why I love preserving this holiday, because Halloween asks us to imagine and the archives want us to remember. And when those two things meet up, history stays alive. So one of the questions I have to ask myself, again, because I try to treat this as if I'm a museum curator, right? Because that's eventually, that's the big wish and want for all of this stuff is a museum. So I'm trying to approach it from a museum curator's standpoint. So I have to ask, not why this song is important, but what would we lose if this song disappeared? What if the record went out of print? What if nobody remembered it? What if no one passed it along to any of their friends who love Halloween as well? Would Halloween disappear? No. But a voice and a perspective of Halloween would disappear. And that's very important. Our memories deserve a soundtrack, and that's what this song becomes a part of. Halloween history doesn't belong to just famous movies or books or chart topic songs. It belongs to the overlooked, to cult bands, to independent artists, to local haunted attractions, handmade costumes, family traditions, old photographs, cassette tapes labeled with a, marker that you can't read. All that stuff matters, but it doesn't matter to everyone. But that's not the point. Someone this matters to. And if it matters to someone, it's worth preserving. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this new minted archive that I'm calling things. It's not going to be a museum of expensive things. It's going to be a museum of meaningful things. And that's a huge difference. I don't really care how much value the things that I collect have. It matters to me more what they represent and the memories involved and what that means to other people. And that's why I wanted to include this song, because not only is it a wonderful song, but it brings back memories for me for the time that I was introduced to this band. Because, like I said, preserving Halloween isn't only about saving the biggest stories. It's making sure the quiet ones are never forgotten. And that's important to me, always. So every archive spotlight that I do is going to end the same way. And that's not because every artifact is the same. It's because every artifact deserves to answer one simple question. Why does it belong? When I first opened my notebook and try to figure out what song I want to do next. The beginning goal is to preserve a song and its history and its meaningfulness and all that stuff. But whenever I end on these, I realize I'm preserving something more important. I'm preserving a feeling. Costumes wear out. Candy disappears. Jack-o'-lanterns collapse back into the earth. Photographs fade. But even our memories get a little bit softer every year, right? But every once in a while, somebody creates something that keeps our memories alive. And it's not by recreating them, but it's reminding us how they felt. And that's what this artifact today does for me, and hopefully for you. It doesn't ask us to remember a specific Halloween. It reminds us of our Halloween, and the one that belongs only to us, and the one where we were convinced our costume from this year was the greatest one we'd ever wear. The one where we walked home feeling shorter because our candy bucket was weighing us down. The one where we wanted to stay awake just a little bit longer, always wondering what the next Halloween would bring. And those moments don't belong in a history book. They belong in ourselves. And it's not really as important to me to preserve facts, but to preserve feelings. That's an amazing thing. This band that we've been talking about built their entire identity around monsters. And ultimately, they gave us one of the best reminders of what Halloween is really about. It's not about fear. It's not about wonder. Not about horror, imagination, monsters, memory. The brightest lights come from the darkest places, and there's something wonderfully Halloween about that. So today, we're not preserving a psychobilly song. We're preserving anticipation. We're preserving childhood, imagination, the sound of October. And we're preserving the simple reminder that somewhere inside of every Halloween enthusiast, no matter how old we get, there's still a kid who can't wait for October 31st. And for those reasons, and for the memories it continues to awaken, Trick or Treat by Nekromantix has earned its permanent place within the Preserve Halloween archive. So, every time we open another drawer inside the Preserve Halloween archive, I'm reminded that history isn't made only by famous people or best-selling records or priceless collections. Sometimes history lives in the things that almost slipped away. An old photograph, a faded decoration, a forgotten recording, a family tradition that survives because someone cared enough to pass it on. And that's why this archive exists. Not to tell you what Halloween was, but to help ensure it continues to be. So, at this time, I want to ask something of you guys. If there's an artifact in your own life, a costume tucked away in an attic, a photograph from a long-forgotten Halloween party, a record you played every October for decades, or simply just a memory you've had since childhood, do not let it disappear. Tell its story, share it with your family, pass it on, share it with us, and we'll talk about it. But preservation doesn't begin in museums. It begins with people who decide that something is worth remembering. And that's how every archive in the world begins. One person saving one story, and maybe that's how ours began, together. Because this Preserve Halloween archive isn't just for me. It's not my collection. It's our collection, collectively. One artifact, one story, one memory at a time. That's how it's going to live on. So, thank you guys for stopping by. I look forward to your next visit to the Preserve Halloween archive. So until next time, stay strange, stay curious, stay spooky, and always preserve Halloween.